Welcome to the Vine Resources podcast show. Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources podcast show. I'm delighted today to have Eric Benhamou on the phone with me. Eric is the founder and CEO of Benhamou Global Ventures. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Eric, can you perhaps just give us a brief introduction about yourself and your company, please?
Sure. Our firm is a boutique venture capital firm headquartered in Silicon Valley. We started it in 2004, and this was after having spent about 25 to 30 years building companies myself in the field of enterprise IT. We focus on early stage investments, companies that participate in the digitization of the enterprise around the world, particularly those who are based on cloud technologies, cybersecurity, industrial IoT, and both infrastructure as well as applications. The firm has been in existence for about 14 years, and we're currently investing out of our fourth fund. And it is a particularly good time to be in this business, in this industry. Fantastic.
Thanks for that introduction, Eric. And I can see I know you've got a wealth of experience, so I'm really excited to find out about some of your insights when I ask you some of these questions. But can you share to our listeners, perhaps what a typical day in the business looks like for you as the leader?
Well, we make relatively few investments in relation to the number of companies that we meet. To give you some calibration on this, we probably, as a team, review 500 opportunities per year, and we make about 5 or 6 investments, so roughly 1%. And when I say review an opportunity, I'm not talking about browsing through a business plan. I'm talking about meeting a founding team and having at least a 1 to 2 hour conversation about their plan, about the company. So we have a high bar. I don't think it's atypical in our industry.
Yep.
But reviewing a lot of companies enable us to really get the pulse of the industry and try to focus on the very best.
Fantastic. And can you perhaps name a person who's had a tremendous impact on you as a leader, Eric? Even someone who's been a mentor to you, and perhaps how's that impacted your life?
The experience that probably was the most formative to me and really set me on a trajectory in this industry was when I was a graduate student at Stanford. Now, this goes back to the mid-'70s. But I was privileged to be a part of the very first group of graduate students that had a chance to work on aspects of the internet. Vint Cerf was widely credited to be one of the key fathers of the internet. Was a professor at Stanford at the time, and I was given an email address with an @ sign in the middle of it, and I didn't realize that I was one of possibly the first hundreds or 1,000 people to enjoy such a privilege. And this in combination with my early visits to Xerox PARC, almost next door to Stanford University, really set me on a course to build a career in the networking industry. So this was again in the mid to late 70s, and this was before the PC and before the networks as we know them today. And so this was perhaps the most formative and influential experience I've ever had.
Fantastic. Employee engagement perhaps is very critical to the success of any business. Perhaps what are you seeing, or what are you seeing either within your company, but what are you seeing from the top that has made companies have successfully engaged employees?
Well, in the technology industry, there is an idealist streak and a desire to have an impact, to make a dent, in the words of Steve Jobs, and basically to fundamentally change the way things are. This is perhaps a lofty goal, but it makes what we do different from many other industries. We know that whatever we do, if it is successful, will have a transformative effect on the world as we know it today. So obviously the internet perhaps is at the very top of the list, but just about everything every technology that I enumerated earlier has the same kind of potential. And we certainly try to identify this deep desire to have an impact, to make a change amongst all of our founders. If they don't have this kind of passion, it doesn't matter how smart they are. Passion is really what takes you through the hard times, and we know there will be hard times in any early stage startup. And we want to see this amongst all of our founders.
What do you believe is the biggest challenge right now facing leaders today?
In Silicon Valley, we have an extraordinary density of smart, creative people. And the price of this success is that the place has become extremely expensive, extremely competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very hard to build companies in Silicon Valley. The best companies are really those who are built on a cross-border model, where a few key positions are indeed based here, but most of the company actually is somewhere else. It could be in Europe, it could be in Asia, it could literally be anywhere else in the world. But young companies today have to adopt a cross-border model very early in their lives.
What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received, Eric?
I've received a lot of advice over the years, and I've come to appreciate that sometimes it is true, sometimes it only sounds true. Here is one line which I think has stayed through all of these decades of work in the technology industry. It's all good until it's not. I think this captures the fact that you can be riding on a high momentum curve and feeling that you are destined to greatness, and all of a sudden bad things happen, whether it is the loss of key employees or competitive threat or a customer that rejects your product, and all of a sudden the machine stops working, and you can go from being on top to being on the bottom very quickly. And having this phrase and this lesson present in the back of your mind basically instills the right amount of paranoia that every entrepreneur should have.
What's the one mistake you witness leaders making more frequently than others?
Well, a very common mistake in our industry is hubris. Many young entrepreneurs today have the immense advantage of being able to accelerate their product or their service by using the internet as a platform to give them reach to literally hundreds of millions, billions of consumers. It took decades to build that platform. But if you write it today, it's almost like you benefit from a giant accelerator. Mm-hmm. That enables you to reach scale in a matter of a few years. It took decades to get to those large multi-billion-dollar scales just a generation ago. And inevitably, it engenders hubris and a bit of arrogance. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we witness. It comes with the territory, I suppose. But we are drawn to founders who are able to have enough depth of character to remain humble and to understand that if they succeed, the success is as much due to luck as it is to their particular skills and perseverance.
Fantastic. How do you believe you see the industry changing in the future, and how do you think that will affect people's ability to attract and retain the best talent?
Well, one of the big changes, which I alluded to briefly, is that young companies used to be extremely concentrated geographically. And today, it is much more common to have young companies adopt a cross-border model very early in their lives. So a young company has to be able to establish itself while maintaining only a modest presence in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And we have to be there simply because of this is where things happen. This is where partnerships get forged. This is where relationships get developed. And having operations spread in different geographies, sometimes halfway around the world. So to me, this is a very recent change. I would say that's something that started to happen only 10 years ago, but it's much more typical of what we expect future startups to be.
If you had your time again and you were giving your 20-year-old self advice, what's the one thing you would say?
I believe that today, more than ever, you have to be extremely disciplined about understanding the markets that you serve and position your products extremely well in a differentiated way inside your markets. It seems obvious to say it this way, but frankly, in the 80s and 90s, you could be extremely technology driven and be confident that a market would get formed around your technology. In other words, engineering excellence by itself was sufficient to not guarantee, but certainly dramatically increase your chances of success. Today, I don't want to say that technology is a commodity, but it's very common to be able to overcome technical problems. Mm-hmm. There are many smart engineers and scientists around the world. It's almost taken for granted. What's much harder to achieve is to really understand market dynamics and to position your technology inside a constantly changing market. So to me, this is something which I would keep very present in my mind if I were to start over at the beginning of my career.
Eric, what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you?
The best way is via email. I do not tweet, even though I do have a tweet handle, but I do respond to email. And my email is eric@benhamouglobalventures.com. Benhamou Global Ventures is all in one word.
Eric, thank you so much for sharing those insights, and it's great to hear about your story, particularly how you came to your first email address as well. Thank you so much for being on the show. I wish you all the best for this year ahead.
Thanks very much.